Hi everyone, welcome. The system that you see right here is a worm bin that I last fed 11 days ago, and all it got was veggies. All it got was cauliflower, so I thought we'd treat it to some fruits today. It's melon rinds, both watermelon and cantaloupe melon, as well as a half of an apple and some coffee. So I've also got worm chow that we can include with the feeding. So these little guys are the worms that I recruited from the compost I harvested out of my compost barrel. My compost barrel was in need of repair, so I had to haul out its contents, and part of that was to naturally harvest the castings that had been accumulating in there for years and years. It wasn't really the type of thing I was expecting to do in the middle of winter, but there was a huge crack in the container, had to be mended. And then I ended up with a whole lot of material that I knew was filled with worms. So what I did was I hauled all that material indoors and then I proceeded to round up all the wormies that I could from that material, and that was over the course of numerous introductions of additional worms. Five different occasions we added worms to this population. I've got some info here. I guess before I get really dirty, I might as well share the info that I've assembled here off of my tracking spreadsheet. Kind of nice to have info about your systems recorded. You know that the age and when the last feeding was and how often it's been fed. Even the estimated number I made reference to right there, 1471. Pretty good sized population. And that's also, got to keep in mind that that was the estimated population at the time of the launch of the system 168 days ago. And over that time, naturally, they've had the opportunity to increase that number. And hopefully they've taken advantage of that opportunity. I think in general we've observed that they probably have. So this material is really nice. I'm just going to start picking around through it. I think that's kind of what we did last time. Just kind of looking around, and there was no real hot spot, so to speak. It didn't even seem like they were so interested in the feeding area. It just seemed like they were just interested in being pretty much anywhere throughout the bin, all over the place. Like here too, last time I fed down the middle, that's what that coffee filter was indicating to us. But right here on the edge, pretty much as far as you can get from that spot where the feeding was last placed, there's just tons of worms everywhere throughout the material. Yeah. The material's all got a nice moisture content. I can see little scraps of leaf stems and leaf sticks and other types of probably bedding debris, maybe even bits of leftover food scraps here and there. So the material seems to be pretty rich in everything that they need. Maybe the bedding is a little bit shy, but I would say all those little bits of stuff that maybe used to be their bedding is all fair game as far as food goes. The moisture content, I think, is pretty good too. So yeah, all this stuff I scraped off the top, a little bit dry. I'm just going to blend it in like I did on the other side too. So we'll examine the other edge as well. Man, interesting how many worms are hanging out on these edges that are furthest away from where the feeding was last applied 11 days ago. So that feeding was their 12th. This will be feeding number 13 for this system. So many castings, but definitely not a lot of bedding material. The other thing that I included with my feedings recently was bedding to give them what they need as far as like carbon food content too, because I guess the bedding is almost like a code word for making sure that you include material that they can eventually consume. That's more of like the carbon content to balance their diet out. Interesting. Every time I kind of scoop up a fresh handful of this stuff, I do clearly see, let's see if it happens again just here randomly, I just see like lots of little worms scattered within the material. Little worm, little worm, little worm, lots of little worms nestled over there. So there's, big ones easy to see, but you also kind of just notice the presence of little ones all over the place within the material too. Worms everywhere. Very nice. All right, been building up to checking out how the feeding area is holding up. Like I said, veggies only last time, cauliflower, and it was frozen, so as it thawed, I imagine it became really mushy, probably very easy to chew through if you're a little wormy. So I'm wondering if we'll see any scraps of it. There were a couple more chunky pieces like stems, the end, the butt end of the entire cauliflower head. I thought that maybe if we came in here soon enough we might catch a little glimpse of leftovers of that stuff, but I would also probably bet equal money on the likelihood that we won't. Here too, it's just, as you open up like a batch of material that is pretty heavily populated with wormies, you could see all the big ones. They're very obvious, but mixed everywhere within them is little ones too everywhere. Very, very nice mix of large and small worms everywhere. Just one big happy family. Very cool, very cool. It does seem like we can almost be even more generous with the bedding if we wanted to, because I'm sure, I don't even remember now, I think I must have skimmed through the last video, but I don't remember exactly how much bedding we used. I do remember breaking all the cauliflower into two separate halves, creating a lower layer that included some bedding materials, and then a second layer. Once again, probably kind of sandwiching another layer of bedding materials in between those two layers of cauliflower. But there's not a trace of anything, not a scrap of paper, There again, I guess I should have spoken sooner, because we probably would have seen it sooner. So here is actually a chunk of leftover bedding, and I guess because it was crumbled up, it, evaded what the rest of the material got right there. You can even read it still. But everywhere else where the bedding material had not been crumpled up so tightly that the worms couldn't get at it, it's all gone. Totally gone. Very nice. Alright, as long as we're here, we're going to just feed in the middle again like we've been doing. Sometimes I feed in different locations or do interesting feeding patterns or alternate feeding locations, things like that. And those are the things that seem to set a bin apart in terms of it having some sort of an interesting twist to it in terms of how it's being managed or something like that. Here I think the interesting twist is just the fact that these worms were all kind of, as far as I'm concerned, caught in the wild, because all I did was put a bucket outside, or a trash pail, technically speaking, and started putting all my kitchen scraps in there, and did so for years. Gardening scraps too, weeds, stuff you're trimming here and there, wherever. And the worms all went into that container to get at all that stuff voluntarily on their own. Never put any worms into my outdoor compost barrel. They all got in there on their own. So whenever I pull worms out of that system, for whatever reason, I always treat that as me kind of catching worms almost in the wild, Not that I even caught them. They, came to my to my kitchen scraps and gardening waste on their own. But I think we're ready to start using some of this bedding material that I bought down here. These are just chunks of paper towel, soiled paper towel, used for this, that, and the other thing. It always seems to make good sense just to kind of chuck them all in a big pile and, eventually try to put them to better use than just chucking them in the trash. At least that's how I see it. So we've got ourselves a nice little foundation here to start piling stuff into. We can use up maybe about half of the coffee we gave them. And I'm running very low on my worm chow, but we're going to use up some of my worm chow too to try to make the coffee a little bit more interesting, combining it with some stuff. And then we could start putting in some of this melon. What else do we have here? Do we put the apple down low? I think we should. It's already starting to thaw out and become mushy, but it is still more or less frozen. So let's make actually, whatever, that piece of watermelon can stay down there with all that cantaloupe. We'll make the lower level the apple and cantaloupe level. And then the top level will be the watermelon only level. How does that sound? All this nice bedding and paper, stuff that's maybe going to leave some leftovers like this piece did, maybe not. I'm guessing not. Because it is pretty spread out evenly here. And you know what? We talked about utilizing what had been the feeding zone indicator in a similar fashion, including it down here as bedding now rather than using it as a feeding zone indicator. We've got ourselves a nice new one to do that, right? So why don't we polish off our remaining supply of coffee, and then we'll at the same time provide ourselves with the replacement feeding zone indicator. In can come what remains of the melon rind. A couple more pretty good sized chunky pieces to include down here. And I've also got a little bit of my crushed eggshell. Give them a little bit of grit to help along with the digestion process. And I think that's probably a good enough feeding for now. It does seem like a very capable bin. I would have to assume that you agree with me. And, you know, I'm almost thinking, do we try to beef up the bedding supply a little bit more for these little guys before we close up the feeding area? Right on top of the food, maybe a little bit more bedding. Hang on one second. Here we go. I've got my pre-made mix of, it's shredded paper and cardboard, stuff that came right out of my shredder, but then I mix it with a bunch of really fine particles of just leafy material. And I think it's a pretty nice combination of different bedding types. I keep it damp, so it's got a little bit of moisture content. I even try to keep it sort of semi, quote-unquote, inoculated with some casting material even thrown in there to help the material sort of have a little bit of a biology to it rather than just being sterile paper and leaves and whatnot. It supposedly makes the bedding a little bit better for the worms since it's already kind of primed for worm use that way. Man, these castings are really nice. Just the moisture content is perfect. I love how this stuff all crumbles and flows. Besides babies, I also see lots of cocoons. Every now and then I just spot one as I'm plowing through. I'm not really stopping to gawk at it, but it doesn't seem like they've really, or at least I don't know, here I'm trying to take two things and maybe connect the dots, you know, incorrectly, but you know, there's always that talk about a worm bin kind of reaching its limit as far as the worms being able to sense that they're, you know, they're approaching overpopulation, so they'll stop breeding or whatever, stop seeing cocoons. They'll just be satisfied with the head count that they've got and let it remain stable that way. But I don't know, when I look through the material, and almost every handful's got a little tiny baby worm that's got the potential to become a nice big fat worm pretty soon if you keep feeding it properly, then it almost seems like you would need 5 times the space for this many worms. So, alright, I think we're done here. I never even got around to using all the last of my bedding material, and it seems like I really could have too, but you know what? Let's just treat that as us having substituted the prepared bedding from my little, you know, batch of prepared bedding here in the place of that napkin, and in fact I think they got upgraded by you getting that stuff instead. What do you think? Alright everyone, we're almost done here. I've just got a couple things to bring over here. We've got the paper coverings. Paper coverings I think is all that we've ever had in this system. I think we made a decision early on that we're going to see how we do in here if we never cover with plastic. I don't know. I might have to check my records. I might be confusing this with another one, but I for some reason believe that it's had this paper bag on here from day one and never needed anything else to protect it from drying and evaporation. And certainly now too with the humidity in the summertime here, or at least where I live, no worry about stuff drying out. Not too quickly. It'll dry over time, but at least it'll be gradual enough that you can notice it and react to it. But yeah, right now it's no problem with stuff having enough moisture. It's almost like the moisture is getting drawn out of the air into the material and keeping things really damp. But that's it for today. I've got a few things I've got to clean up and put away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That stuff's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye now.